The dust-laden wind carried the sound of hoofbeats long before the wagon train appeared on the horizon. Olivia Kendrick clutched her threadbare shawl tightly around her shoulders as she watched her family's wagon disappear into the distance. The cruel April sun of 1876 beating down upon the Nevada territory without mercy. They had left her behind deliberately at a trading post just outside Pahrump with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small bundle of personal belongings. "They ain't coming back, miss," the trading post owner said from behind her, his voice a mixture of pity and pragmatism. "Your pa made that clear enough when he paid me that $2 to let you stay here till someone came along." Olivia felt the hot sting of tears, but refused to let them fall. At 20 years old, she had endured enough of her stepmother's hatred and her father's indifference. The consumption that had left her weakened for months had been the final excuse they needed. A burden, they'd called her. Useless. Unable to pull her weight on their journey to California. "I'll find work," she said, more to herself than to the man. "I can sew, I can cook." The trading post owner, a grizzled man named Harlow, snorted. "Not much call for that kind of work out here, 'less you're looking to work in a saloon. And I reckon that ain't what a proper lady like yourself is wanting." 3 days passed with Olivia sleeping on a cot in the storage room, earning her keep by helping Harlow organize his merchandise and clean the small, dusty establishment. Each night, she fought back tears as she realized the magnitude of her abandonment. Each morning she forced herself to rise, to work, to survive. On the 4th day, a lone rider approached from the east. Olivia was sweeping the porch when she first spotted him, tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, with a dark hat pulled low over his brow. His horse, a magnificent palomino, moved with the easy confidence of an animal well treated by its master. Harlow stepped out beside her. "That'll be Mason Yates," he said. "Owns the Crooked Arrow Ranch about 20 miles north. Good man. Fair, comes in once a month for supplies." The rider dismounted with fluid grace, tying his horse to the hitching post before removing his hat. Sunlight caught in his light brown hair, and when he looked up, Olivia found herself staring into eyes the color of the summer sky. He couldn't have been more than 30, his face weathered from the elements but handsome nonetheless. "Harlow," he greeted with a nod before his gaze settled on Olivia. Something flickered in his expression, curiosity, perhaps, or surprise at seeing an unfamiliar face. "Mason," Harlow replied. "This here's Miss Olivia Kendrick. Been staying here a few days since her family. Moved on without her." The way Harlow phrased it was kind, but the reality hung in the air between them. Mason's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly as his eyes met Olivia's again. "Left behind?" he asked, his voice low. Olivia lifted her chin. "I was ill. They decided I would slow them down on their way to California." Mason studied her for a long moment, taking in her simple dress, her work-worn hands, the quiet dignity with which she held herself despite her circumstances. Then he turned to Harlow. "I'll need the usual supplies plus extra flour and coffee." He glanced back at Olivia. "And I'm looking to hire help at the ranch. My cook quit last month, headed back east to care for her ailing mother." Harlow raised an eyebrow. "Miss Kendrick here says she can cook." "So too," Mason nodded slowly. "The position comes with room and board, fair wages." His eyes met Olivia's directly. "It's honest work, Miss Kendrick, though the ranch is isolated. I've got 3 ranch hands who take their meals in the main house, plus myself." Olivia felt her heart begin to race. It wasn't charity, it was employment, a chance to stand on her own 2 feet. "I would be grateful for the opportunity, Mr. Yates." "It's settled then," Mason said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to hire a woman he'd just met. "We'll leave after I've gathered my supplies." 2 hours later, Olivia found herself seated beside Mason on his wagon, her small bundle of possessions tucked beneath the seat, watching the trading post grow smaller in the distance. The palomino was tied to the back of the wagon, occasionally nickering as if in conversation with the two draft horses pulling the vehicle. "I should warn you," Mason said after they'd traveled in silence for several miles. "The ranch isn't fancy. Built it with my own hands 5 years ago after I came back from the war." "You fought in the war between the states?" Olivia asked, realizing how little she knew about this man who had just become her employer. Mason nodded. "Union cavalry. Seems like a lifetime ago now." He glanced sideways at her. "Your family heading to California?" "They from back east, Missouri," Olivia replied. "After Mother died, Father remarried and decided to head west, said there were opportunities in California." She tried to keep the bitterness from her voice and failed. "And they just left you?" It wasn't a question, but a statement tinged with barely concealed anger. "My stepmother never wanted me around. I was a reminder of my father's first wife. When I fell ill with consumption last winter, she convinced him I wouldn't survive the journey." Olivia stared at her hands. "I've been recovering slowly. I'm not contagious anymore. The doctor assured me of that before we left Missouri." Mason's hands tightened on the reins. "No decent family leaves one of their own behind." The simple statement, delivered without pity but with firm conviction, brought unexpected comfort. Olivia found herself blinking back tears again. "I've survived worse," she said softly. Mason didn't reply immediately, his attention seemingly focused on navigating a particularly rocky stretch of road. When he spoke again, his voice had gentled. "Miss Kendrick, I don't know what you've survived, but I can tell you this on my ranch. No one gets left behind. From this day forward, as long as you choose to stay, you're part of mine now." The words hung in the air between them, a promise from a stranger that somehow carried more weight than all the false assurances her own blood had ever given her. The journey to the Crooked Arrow Ranch took most of the day. As they traveled, the landscape changed, revealing stretches of sagebrush and juniper trees, occasional stands of pine, and distant purple mountains. Mason pointed out landmarks and boundaries, speaking with quiet pride about the land he had claimed and tamed. "There it is," he said finally as they crested a small rise. Olivia saw a sprawling ranch house built of timber and stone, a large barn, several corrals, and a bunkhouse. Smoke rose from the main house's chimney, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance. It wasn't grand, but it was solid and well-maintained, a place built to last. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. Mason's face softened with pride. "It's home." As they approached, two men emerged from the barn. One was older, perhaps in his 50s, with steel-gray hair and a weathered face. The other was younger, close to Olivia's age, with a shock of red hair visible beneath his hat. "That's Walter Hughes, my foreman," Mason explained, nodding toward the older man. "And Patrick Donovan, one of my ranch hands. The third, Samuel Tucker, is probably out checking the north pasture." Walter approached the wagon as Mason brought it to a halt. His shrewd eyes took in Olivia with undisguised curiosity. "Boss," he greeted Mason before tipping his hat to Olivia. "Madam." "Walter, this is Miss Olivia Kendrick. She'll be taking over as cook." Mason jumped down from the wagon and came around to help Olivia descend. "Miss Kendrick, Walter's been with me since I started this place. There's nothing about ranching he doesn't know." Walter's handshake was firm but respectful. "Pleasure, Miss Kendrick. Been eating my own cooking for weeks now, so you're a sight for sore eyes." Patrick approached next, suddenly shy in the presence of a woman, mumbling a greeting as he twisted his hat in his hands. Olivia smiled at him, trying to put him at ease. "I'll show you to your quarters," Mason said, lifting her bundle from beneath the seat. "Walter, can you and Patrick unload the supplies?" The cook's quarters turned out to be a small but comfortable room off the kitchen, with its own entrance to the outside. A narrow bed with a clean quilt, a chest of drawers, a small table with a mirror above it, and a rocking chair by the window comprised the furnishings. Simple, but more than Olivia had dared hope for. The previous cook, Mrs. Abernathy, left some things behind you're welcome to use, Mason explained, setting her bundle on the bed. "There's a washroom just through that door, shared with the main house." Olivia moved to the window, looking out at the vast expanse of land stretching toward the mountains. "It's so peaceful here." Mason stood in the doorway watching her. "It can be lonely too," he said quietly. "Winter especially, but we keep busy." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, of what it meant to build a life in such a place, with its beauty and its hardships. "I should let you get settled," Mason said, clearing his throat. "Supper's usually at 6, but today, just whenever you're ready. There's plenty in the pantry. Walter's been keeping it stocked, if not organized." After he left, Olivia sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. Just that morning, she had been a castaway with no prospects. Now she had a position, quarters of her own, and the beginnings of a new life. She allowed herself a moment to feel the weight of it all, then squared her shoulders and began to unpack. The kitchen proved to be large and well-equipped, with a cast-iron stove, a pump for water at the sink, and a pantry stocked with staples. Olivia rolled up her sleeves and set to work, determined to prove her worth from the very start. By 6 o'clock, she had prepared a hearty beef stew, fresh biscuits, and an apple cobbler for dessert. The meal was simple but flavorful, and the reactions from the men as they sat down at the large kitchen table told her everything she needed to know. "Good Lord," Walter said after his first bite. "Miss Kendrick, I believe you just saved us all from starvation." Patrick nodded enthusiastically, his mouth too full to speak, while Samuel, who had returned just before supper, gave her a thumbs up, his expression blissful. Mason sat at the head of the table, watching the scene with quiet amusement. When his eyes met Olivia's, there was a warmth there that hadn't been present earlier. "Thank you," he said simply. That night, as Olivia lay in her new bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the occasional whinny from the barn, the creak and settle of the house itself, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity, as Olivia settled into life at the Crooked Arrow. She quickly established a routine, rising before dawn to prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, spending her mornings baking bread and planning meals, using afternoons for mending and other household tasks. Each day brought new challenges and small triumphs as she learned the rhythms of ranch life. Mason was often away from the house, overseeing the various operations of the ranch, but when their paths crossed, Olivia found herself increasingly drawn to the quiet strength of the man. He never spoke of her family's abandonment again, but there was an unspoken understanding between them, a recognition of what it meant to build something new from nothing. One evening in late May, nearly a month after her arrival, Olivia was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, she saw Mason riding in, his expression grim. He dismounted quickly and strode toward the bunkhouse, calling for Walter. Something was wrong. Olivia continued her task, but kept an eye on the men as they gathered near the corral, their conversation too distant to overhear but their body language tense. Eventually, Mason headed toward the house while the others returned to their duties. Olivia met him at the kitchen door. "Is everything all right, Mr. Yates?" He removed his hat, running a hand through his hair in a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of frustration. "Cattle rustlers hit the Thompson place last night. Second ranch this month." "How terrible," Olivia said, genuinely concerned. "Was anyone hurt?" "Thompson's son got a bullet in the shoulder, but he'll live." Mason hung his hat on a peg by the door. "I've asked Walter to organize extra patrols. We can't afford to lose any of our herd, not with the Army contract coming due." Olivia poured him a cup of coffee without being asked, setting it on the table as he sank into a chair. "Is there anything I can do?" Mason looked up at her, a smile briefly softening his troubled expression. "You're already doing it, Miss Kendrick, having a proper home to come back to." He trailed off, seeming embarrassed by what he'd been about to say. "I understand," Olivia said softly, and she did. In the weeks she had been at the ranch, she had transformed the main house from a functional but sparse bachelor's dwelling into something that truly felt like a home. Curtains now hung at the windows, flowers from the meadow brightened the tables, and the scent of fresh baked goods regularly filled the air. Mason sipped his coffee, his shoulders gradually relaxing. "We should be safe enough. The rustlers tend to hit smaller operations with less manpower." He glanced up at her. "Still, it might be wise for you to learn how to handle a firearm just in case." The suggestion surprised her. "I've never fired a gun." "Never too late to learn," Mason replied. "We'll start tomorrow if you're willing." True to his word, the next afternoon found Olivia standing beside Mason in a clearing behind the barn, a Colt revolver looking impossibly large in her hands. "It's heavier than I expected," she admitted, trying to hold it the way he had demonstrated. "That's good, the weight helps absorb the recoil," Mason explained, standing close behind her, his hands gently adjusting her grip. "Now, keep both eyes open, focus on the target and squeeze the trigger slowly. Don't pull it." The target was a series of tin cans set up on a fallen log about 20 yards away. Olivia took a deep breath, aimed as instructed, and squeezed the trigger. The blast was louder than she had anticipated, and the recoil jolted through her arms despite Mason's warning. The shot went wide, missing the cans entirely. "That's all right," Mason encouraged. "Nobody hits their target the first time. Try again." After several more attempts and several more misses, Olivia felt her frustration mounting. "Perhaps I'm not suited for this." Mason shook his head. "You're overthinking it. Here." He stepped closer, his chest nearly touching her back as he positioned himself behind her. His arms came around to support hers, his hands covering her own on the gun. "Like this. Feel how I'm holding it. Now breathe with me." Olivia was suddenly very aware of his proximity, of the solid warmth of him against her back, the scent of leather and pine that seemed to cling to him. She tried to focus on his instructions rather than the flutter in her stomach. "Now," he said softly, his breath warm against her ear. Together, they squeezed the trigger. One of the cans flew off the log with a satisfying ping. "I hit it," Olivia exclaimed, forgetting herself in her excitement and turning in Mason's arms. Their faces were suddenly very close, her eyes level with his mouth, which had curved into a rare, full smile. For a moment neither moved, caught in an unexpected awareness of each other. Mason stepped back first, clearing his throat. "Good shot, Miss Kendrick. Now let's see you do it on your own." With renewed confidence, Olivia turned back to the target, raised the gun, and fired. Another can tumbled from the log. The shooting lesson marked a subtle shift in their relationship. While Mason remained respectful and professional, there was a new ease between them, a comfortable camaraderie that gradually deepened as spring gave way to summer. June arrived with blistering heat, and with it came the arduous task of branding the new calves. For 3 days, the ranch was a hive of activity from dawn till dusk. Olivia found herself rising even earlier than usual to prepare massive breakfasts for the ranch hands and the extra men Mason had hired to help with the branding. On the third day, as the sun reached its zenith, Olivia carried buckets of cold water and lemonade out to the branding corral. The men, stripped to their shirts with sleeves rolled up, were covered in dust and sweat. Mason was in the thick of it, wrestling a calf to the ground as Walter approached with the branding iron. Olivia had never seen Mason like this: raw physical power tempered with precision, his movements fluid and confident. She found herself staring, a strange heat that had nothing to do with the summer sun creeping up her neck. Walter noticed her first. "Miss Kendrick, tell me that's lemonade and not a mirage." The men eagerly crowded around as she poured cups of the cool liquid. Mason was the last to approach, wiping his brow with a bandana. "You're an angel," he said, accepting the cup she offered. Their fingers brushed, and despite the heat, Olivia felt a shiver run through her. "Just doing my job, Mr. Yates," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. His eyes held hers a moment longer than necessary. "Mason," he said quietly, "after all this time, I think you can call me Mason." That evening, after the men had bathed and changed, Olivia served a feast to celebrate the completion of the branding: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and for dessert, a special treat of peach pie made from the first peaches of the season that a traveling peddler had sold her the week before. The mood around the table was jovial, with the men sharing stories and jokes. Even Mason seemed more relaxed than usual, laughing at Walter's tall tales and offering a few anecdotes of his own. As Olivia cleared the plates, Mason rose to help her, something he had never done before. In the kitchen, away from the others, he spoke softly. "You've transformed this place, Olivia." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice made her heart skip. "I don't just mean the cooking or the curtains. I don't know how to explain it." "You don't have to," Olivia replied, understanding what he couldn't put into words. The ranch had become a true home, not just for her, but for all of them. Mason nodded, seeming relieved that she understood. "There's a social in town next Saturday. Dance, potluck, that sort of thing. I usually don't bother with such affairs, but—" He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Would you like to go?" The invitation caught Olivia by surprise. She hadn't left the ranch since her arrival, and the prospect of attending a social event with Mason, no less, both excited and terrified her. "I would," she said finally, "but I don't have anything suitable to wear. I'm riding into Pahrump tomorrow for supplies. There's a dressmaker there. I could." He trailed off, clearly realizing the impropriety of offering to buy her a dress. Olivia saved him from his awkwardness. "I have some money saved from my wages. If you wouldn't mind my accompanying you, I could visit the dressmaker myself." Relief flooded his features. "Of course. We'll leave after breakfast." The ride to Pahrump the next day was pleasant despite the summer heat. Mason pointed out various landmarks and shared stories of the area's history, revealing a depth of knowledge about the territory that impressed Olivia. "How did you come to settle here?" she asked as they approached the town. "After the war, I mean." Mason was silent for a moment, his eyes on the horizon. "I had nowhere else to go. My parents died while I was away fighting. Our farm in Pennsylvania was sold to pay their debts." He glanced at her. "I drifted for a while, worked as a ranch hand in Colorado, then Wyoming. Eventually made my way here. The land was cheap, the possibilities endless. And you built all this on your own," he shook his head. "Not entirely on my own. Walter's been with me from the start. And there were others who helped along the way." His expression grew distant. "That's the thing about the West, people help each other. They have to survive. Olivia thought about her own family, who had chosen to abandon rather than help her. Not everyone believes in that principle. Mason's eyes met hers, understanding in their depths. No, he agreed softly. Not everyone. Pahrump was a small but growing settlement, with a main street lined with various businesses, a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, and the dressmaker's shop that was Olivia's destination. While Mason attended to his business at the general store, Olivia visited Madame Beaumont's dress shop. The proprietress, a Frenchwoman who had come west with her late husband during the gold rush, clucked sympathetically when Olivia explained her need for a dress for the upcoming social. "Such short notice, but for you, mademoiselle, I will make something special." She measured Olivia efficiently, chattering all the while about the latest fashions from San Francisco and even Paris. "Is it for your husband, this dress?" she asked as she noted down Olivia's measurements. "Oh no," Olivia corrected quickly. "Mr. Yates is my employer. I'm the cook at his ranch." Madame Beaumont raised an eyebrow, a knowing smile playing about her lips. "Ah, I see. And he brings you to town to buy a pretty dress for the social. Very considerate, this employer of yours." Olivia felt her cheeks warm. "It's not like that. Of course not, chérie." The Frenchwoman winked. "Now, I think a blue to match your eyes, yes, with perhaps a touch of lace at the collar and cuffs. Nothing too elaborate, elegant simplicity, that is what suits you." By the time Mason collected her, Olivia had arranged for a dress to be made and delivered to the ranch by the end of the week. She didn't share the details with him, wanting it to be a surprise. The social on Saturday evening was held in the town hall, a modest but sturdy building that served multiple purposes for the community. Wagons and horses crowded the area outside, and the sounds of music and laughter spilled from the open doors. Olivia sat beside Mason in his wagon, nervously smoothing the skirt of her new dress, a deep blue creation that was indeed elegant in its simplicity, with a modest neckline trimmed in cream-colored lace. "You look beautiful," Mason said quietly as he helped her down from the wagon. He himself was dressed in his best, a dark suit that made his shoulders seem even broader, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. "Thank you," Olivia replied, a pleasant flutter in her stomach at the sincere admiration in his eyes. "You look very handsome yourself." Inside, the hall was decorated with paper lanterns and wildflowers. Tables laden with food lined one wall, while a small band played at the far end of the room. People of all ages mingled, farmers and ranchers with their families, townspeople, and even a few travelers passing through. Mason kept a protective hand at the small of Olivia's back as he guided her through the crowd, introducing her to neighbors and acquaintances. She noticed the curious glances, the raised eyebrows, the whispered conversations that followed them, but Mason seemed oblivious or perhaps simply unbothered by the speculation their appearance together had generated. Mason Yates. "I was beginning to think you turned into a hermit out there on that ranch of yours," a booming voice called out. A barrel-chested man with a sheriff's badge approached, hand extended. "Sheriff Donaldson," Mason greeted, shaking the offered hand. "Just been busy with the spring branding." The sheriff's eyes moved to Olivia, curious but friendly. "And who might this lovely lady be?" "Olivia Kendrick," Mason introduced. "Miss Kendrick joined us as cook at the Crooked Arrow a couple of months ago." "A pleasure, Miss Kendrick," the sheriff said with a tip of his hat. "Our Mason here is lucky to have found you. Best rancher in the county, but between us, I've tasted his cooking and it's a wonder he hasn't poisoned himself yet." Olivia laughed, warming to the sheriff's easy manner. "He's been very kind to give me the position." "Kind, is he?" Sheriff Donaldson's eyes twinkled as he glanced between them. That's not a word most folks would associate with Mason Yates. Must be your good influence already working its magic. Before Mason could respond, the band struck up a lively tune, and couples began moving to the cleared area that served as a dance floor. Well, I should find my wife before she thinks I've abandoned her for the punch bowl again, the sheriff said. Enjoy the evening, you two. As he walked away, Mason turned to Olivia. Would you like to dance? I'm not particularly skilled, but I can manage not to step on your toes. Usually. The self-deprecating humor was so unexpected from the normally serious rancher that Olivia couldn't help but smile. I would love to dance. Mason led her to the dance floor and took her in his arms, respectfully distant, but still close enough that she could feel the warmth of his hand at her waist, smell the clean scent of soap and aftershave. I should warn you, Olivia said as they began to move with the music. I haven't danced since I was 16, at a harvest festival back in Missouri. Then we're evenly matched in our rustiness, Mason replied, guiding her through a turn with more grace than he had claimed to possess. As they danced, Olivia became increasingly aware of the man holding her, the strength in his hands, the subtle scent of him, the way his eyes never left her face. It was intoxicating in a way she had never experienced before. When the music slowed to a waltz, Mason drew her slightly closer, still maintaining propriety but creating a sense of intimacy that made her breath catch. I'm glad you came with me tonight, he said softly, for her ears alone. So am I, Olivia replied, surprised by how much she meant it. They danced 3 more dances before taking a break to sample the refreshments. Mason brought her a cup of punch and a plate with various offerings from the potluck table. Mason, darling, what a lovely surprise to see you here. The voice, feminine and cultivated, belonged to a striking woman in her late 20s, dressed in a fashionable gown that screamed of Eastern wealth. She approached with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the center of attention. Victoria, Mason acknowledged, his expression suddenly guarded. I didn't realize you were back in Pahrump. Just arrived yesterday. Father has business with the mine owners. Her gaze shifted to Olivia, assessing her from head to toe with cool calculation. And who is this? Olivia Kendrick, Mason introduced, his tone formal. Miss Kendrick, this is Victoria Harrington. Her father owns the bank in town. Charmed, Victoria said without warmth. And what brings you to our little community, Miss Kendrick? Before Olivia could answer, Mason spoke. Miss Kendrick is the cook at the Crooked Arrow. Victoria's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. A servant? How? Interesting. She turned her attention back to Mason, effectively dismissing Olivia. You must save a dance for me, darling, for old time's sake. After she sauntered away, Olivia found herself struggling with an unexpected surge of jealousy. An old friend, she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. Mason's jaw tightened. Victoria and I were involved briefly a few years ago. Her father has grand plans for her marriage to someone with the right connections, the right background. A rancher from Pennsylvania didn't qualify. The simple explanation revealed more than he perhaps intended, not just about his past with Victoria, but about how he saw himself. Despite his success, Mason still considered himself an outsider among the territory's elite. Their loss, Olivia said softly. Mason looked at her in surprise, then smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. Dance with me again. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of dancing, conversation, and laughter. Victoria made good on her promise to claim a dance with Mason, but he returned to Olivia's side immediately afterward, his relief evident. It was well after midnight when they finally headed back to the ranch, the wagon rolling smoothly under a canopy of stars. Olivia felt a contentment she hadn't experienced in years, perhaps ever. Thank you for tonight, she said, as the lights of the ranch house came into view. "I can't remember when I've enjoyed myself so much." Mason glanced at her, his profile strong in the moonlight. "Nor can I," he admitted. "You brought something special to the evening, Olivia." The way he said her name made her heart flutter. When he helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Their eyes met, and Olivia found herself holding her breath, wondering if he might kiss her. Instead, Mason stepped back, ever the gentleman. "Good night, Miss Kendrick," he said, reverting to formality as if to create a safe distance between them. "Good night, Mr. Yates," she replied, understanding his caution but feeling a pang of disappointment nonetheless. That night, as she lay in bed replaying the events of the evening, Olivia acknowledged to herself what she had been trying to deny for weeks. She was falling in love with Mason Yates. July brought scorching heat and the constant threat of wildfire. The ranch hands worked tirelessly to maintain fire breaks around the property, while Olivia made sure they stayed hydrated and well-fed. Mason was often away, riding the boundaries of his land or meeting with neighboring ranchers to coordinate fire prevention efforts. One particularly hot afternoon, as Olivia was preparing to start dinner, the sound of galloping hooves drew her to the window. Patrick was riding in hard, his horse lathered with sweat. She hurried outside as Mason emerged from the barn to meet him. "Fire," Patrick gasped, dismounting. Coming up from the South Canyon, moving fast with the wind behind it, Mason's expression grew grim. "How close?" "Maybe 5 miles. Samuel's staying to keep an eye on it. Walter's gone to warn the Hendersons." Mason nodded sharply. "Get yourself some water, then ride to town. We need every man they can spare." He turned to Olivia, who stood frozen on the porch. "Pack whatever valuables you can carry in 10 minutes. If the wind shifts, we may need to evacuate." The calm efficiency with which he issued orders helped Olivia master her own fear. "What can I do to help fight it?" Mason shook his head. "It's too dangerous. I won't just flee while you all risk your lives," Olivia interrupted with unexpected fierceness. "Tell me what to do." For a moment, Mason looked as though he would argue, but something in her expression must have convinced him of her resolve. "We'll need food and water for the men who will be fighting the fire, and someone to care for injuries, burns, smoke inhalation." "I can do that," Olivia said firmly. The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Men from neighboring ranches and from town began arriving, armed with shovels, wet blankets, and grim determination. Olivia organized supplies, prepared sandwiches and canteens of water, and set up a makeshift infirmary in the barn, which was furthest from the approaching fire. By sunset, the sky to the south glowed an ominous orange-red, and the smell of smoke hung heavy in the air. Mason, who had been directing teams of firefighters, returned briefly to check on the ranch. Olivia met him with food and fresh water. His face was streaked with soot, his eyes red from smoke, but he seemed otherwise unharmed. "How bad is it?" she asked as he gulped down the water. "Bad," he admitted. "We're digging fire breaks, but the wind keeps shifting if it turns north." He didn't need to finish the thought. If the wind turned north, the ranch would be directly in the fire's path. Olivia laid a hand on his arm. "You'll stop it, I know you will." Mason covered her hand with his own, squeezing gently. "Pack your things, just in case. If I send word to evacuate, I need to know you'll go. Promise me." The intensity in his eyes made her throat tighten. "I promise." He nodded, seemingly satisfied. "I have to get back. We're setting backfires to try to control the direction." As he turned to leave, Olivia called after him, "Be careful, Mason." He looked back, a tired smile briefly crossing his face. "Always am." Throughout the night, Olivia tended to men who came in with minor injuries or for brief rests. The barn became a way station of sorts, with exhausted firefighters grabbing food and water before heading back to the front lines. News from the fire was sporadic and often contradictory. It was contained. It had jumped the fire break. It was moving west. It was moving east. Dawn broke with the acrid smell of smoke still heavy in the air, but the orange glow on the horizon had dimmed. Shortly after sunrise, Walter stumbled into the barn, his face black with soot, his clothing singed in places. "We've got it," he announced to the weary men gathered there. "It's mostly out, just some hot spots left." A cheer went up, followed by a collective sigh of relief. Olivia felt tears prick her eyes as the tension of the long night finally broke. "Mason," she asked Walter quietly, "still out there making sure it doesn't flare up again, stubborn as always." Walter accepted the cup of coffee she offered with a grateful nod. "He saved the Henderson place, you know. Organized a team to dig a fire break right at their property line when it looked like the flames would take their farm. Wouldn't leave until he was sure they were safe, even when the fire shifted our way." Olivia nodded, not surprised by the account. It was exactly the kind of man Mason was, putting others before himself, shouldering responsibility without complaint. It was mid-morning before Mason finally returned to the ranch. Olivia was in the kitchen, preparing a hearty breakfast for the men who had fought through the night, when she heard the back door open. Turning, she found him standing there, barely recognizable beneath layers of soot and dirt, his clothes torn and burned in places, his eyes bloodshot from smoke and exhaustion. "Mason," she hurried toward him, concerned by how he swayed slightly on his feet. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head wearily. "Just tired and thirsty." Olivia guided him to a chair at the kitchen table, then poured him water which he drank greedily. She dampened a clean cloth and gently began wiping the soot from his face. "The fire?" she asked. "Contained," he replied, his voice hoarse from smoke. "Lost about 1,000 acres of grazing land, but no buildings, no livestock. Could have been much worse." As she cleaned away the grime, Olivia noticed an angry red burn along his forearm where his shirt had been torn away. "You are hurt," she said accusingly. Mason glanced down as if noticing the injury for the first time. "It's nothing." "It most certainly is not nothing." Olivia fetched the medical supplies she had prepared for just such injuries. Carefully, she cleaned the burn with cool water, applied a salve of aloe vera she had prepared from plants growing near the house, and wrapped it in a clean bandage. Throughout her ministrations, Mason watched her face, his expression unreadable despite the exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "You should rest," Olivia said when she had finished, suddenly aware of how close they were, of the intimacy of caring for his wounds. "I need to check on the men, make sure everyone's accounted for. Walter is handling it," she interrupted gently. "You've done enough, Mason. More than enough." Perhaps it was exhaustion that weakened his usual reserve, or perhaps it was something else entirely, but Mason reached out with his uninjured hand and touched her cheek, a gesture so tender it made her breath catch. "You stayed," he said softly. "When most would have fled at the first sign of danger, you stayed." Olivia leaned slightly into his touch. "I couldn't leave, not when." She hesitated, then gathered her courage. "Not when everything I care about was here." Mason's eyes darkened with an emotion she couldn't quite name. For a moment it seemed he might say something more, might finally bridge the careful distance he had maintained between them. Instead, he withdrew his hand and stood, the spell broken. "I should clean up," he said, his voice once again controlled. "Thank you for taking care of the men, and for—" He gestured to his bandaged arm. After he left, Olivia pressed a hand to her cheek where his fingers had been, wondering if she had imagined the longing in his eyes, or if she had simply seen a reflection of her own feelings. The days following the fire were consumed with the work of recovery, assessing damage, repairing fences, moving cattle to unburned pastures. Mason worked from dawn till dusk alongside his men, coming in only for meals, too exhausted for more than brief conversation before retiring to his room. A week after the fire, Olivia was hanging laundry when she noticed a cloud of dust on the road approaching the ranch. As it drew closer, she saw it was a fancy carriage, the kind rarely seen in this part of the territory. Her heart sank as she recognized the Harrington family crest on the door. Victoria Harrington stepped down from the carriage before the driver could assist her, looking as perfectly coiffed and fashionable as she had at the social. She spotted Olivia by the laundry line and approached with determined strides. "Miss Kendrick, isn't it? The cook." Her tone made the occupation sound like something shameful. Olivia straightened, refusing to be intimidated. "Miss Harrington, what brings you to the Crooked Arrow?" "I've come to see Mason, of course." Victoria glanced around. "Is he about?" "He's checking fence lines in the south pasture. He should return for lunch in an hour or so." Victoria frowned, clearly displeased at having to wait. "Well, I suppose I can spare the time. May I wait inside?" Reluctantly, Olivia led Victoria into the main house. The other woman inspected the modest but comfortable furnishings with poorly disguised disdain. "Quaint," she said, running a gloved finger along the back of a chair. "Though I suppose it's an improvement from when I last visited. Your touch, I presume? Would you like some tea while you wait?" Olivia asked, ignoring the backhanded compliment. "Please." Victoria seated herself primly on the sofa. "I hear Mason was quite the hero during the fire. Saved the Henderson farm at great risk to his own property. Typical Mason, always putting others first." She paused, studying Olivia. "He's a good man, you know. Too good for his own good sometimes." Olivia busied herself preparing the tea, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Mr. Yates is indeed a good employer." Victoria laughed, a tinkling sound devoid of genuine mirth. "Oh, my dear, let's not pretend. I saw how you looked at him at the social. But you should know Mason needs a certain type of wife. Someone who can help him advance socially, who understands the world he aspires to join." Olivia set the tea tray down with more force than necessary, rattling the cups. "Mr. Yates seems quite content with the world he has built for himself. For now, perhaps." Victoria accepted a cup of tea with a condescending smile. "But men like Mason have ambitions. He's already one of the most successful ranchers in the territory. With the right connections I can provide he could enter politics, perhaps even represent Nevada when it achieves statehood. But he needs the right woman by his side for that journey." She sipped her tea, her eyes never leaving Olivia's face. "Not a cook, no matter how devoted she might be." The cruel assessment struck at Olivia's deepest insecurities. What could she, abandoned by her own family and with no social standing to speak of, offer a man like Mason Yates? Before she could formulate a response, the sound of boots on the porch announced Mason's return. He entered, removing his hat, then stopped short at the sight of Victoria in his parlor. "Victoria," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "What brings you all the way out here?" Victoria rose gracefully, setting aside her teacup. "Mason, darling, I came to see how you fared after the fire." "Such bravery. Father was most impressed when he heard how you saved the Henderson place." Mason glanced at Olivia, who stood rigid by the tea tray, then back to Victoria. "It was a community effort. Everyone did their part." "So modest," Victoria purred, moving closer to him. "But then, that's always been one of your most attractive qualities." The familiar way she spoke, the possessive gleam in her eye, made Olivia's stomach knot. Unable to bear witnessing more, she murmured an excuse about checking on lunch and fled to the kitchen. There, she busied herself with preparations, trying not to listen to the murmur of voices from the parlor. What was Victoria offering Mason? A return to their former relationship, marriage, and more importantly, what was Mason's response? After what seemed an eternity, she heard the front door open and close, followed by the sound of the carriage departing. Moments later, Mason appeared in the kitchen doorway. "I apologize for the unexpected visitor," he said, his expression unreadable. Olivia nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She continued chopping vegetables for the stew, her movements mechanical. "Olivia." The gentleness in his voice made her look up. "Whatever Victoria said to you before I arrived, she doesn't speak for me." Hope fluttered in Olivia's chest, but caution tempered it. "She seems to know you well." "She knows the man she wants me to be," Mason replied, moving further into the kitchen. "Not the man I am." Olivia set down her knife, gathering her courage. "And what man are you, Mason Yates?" He held her gaze, his eyes serious but warm. "A man who values honesty over pretense, hard work over inherited wealth, loyalty over social climbing." He took a step closer. "A man who finds himself thinking about his cook far more than his proper." The simple confession, delivered without flourish but with absolute sincerity, made Olivia's heart soar. "Perhaps," she said softly, "your cook has similar improper thoughts about her employer." Mason's smile was slow and warm, transforming his face. "Is that so?" Further conversation was interrupted by Walter's arrival at the back door. Urgent news about a break in the north fence, requiring Mason's immediate attention. With a regretful glance at Olivia, Mason departed, leaving her to wonder at the shift in their relationship and what it might mean for her future. That evening, after the ranch hands had retired to the bunkhouse, Mason found Olivia on the front porch, where she often sat in the evenings to enjoy the cooler air and the vast canopy of stars overhead. "May I join you?" he asked, indicating the empty chair beside her. "Of course." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the occasional lowing of cattle, the soft nickering of horses in the barn, the distant howl of a coyote. "Victoria asked me to court her," Mason said finally. "Officially this time with her father's blessing." Olivia's heart clenched, but she kept her voice steady. "I see." "I refused." He turned to look at her, his expression earnest in the dim light from the window. "I told her my heart was already engaged elsewhere." The simple statement hung in the air between them, full of promise and possibility. "Mason," Olivia began, but he held up a hand. "Before you say anything, I need you to understand something. I'm not a wealthy man, not by Eastern standards. Everything I have is tied up in this ranch. It's a good life, but a hard one, isolated, sometimes dangerous." He paused, searching her face. "And I'm not. I'm not always an easy man. The war left its mark on me in ways that aren't always visible." Olivia understood what he was doing, laying bare the realities of the life he was offering, ensuring she had no illusions about what loving him would mean. "I was left behind by my own family," she said quietly. "Discarded when I became inconvenient. I know what it is to be unwanted, to be deemed insufficient." She met his gaze steadily. "But here on this ranch with you, I've never felt more valued, more seen. You told me that first day that I was part of yours now. Did you mean it?" "With all my heart," Mason replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Then that's all I need to know." Olivia reached out, her fingers finding his in the darkness. "I don't need wealth or social standing. I need this ranch, this life. You." Mason's hand tightened around hers. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, he leaned forward. When his lips met hers, Olivia felt as though something deep within her soul had finally clicked into place, a sense of belonging, of rightness, that had eluded her all her life. The kiss was gentle at first, almost reverential, but deepened as Mason's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her closer. When they finally parted, both were breathing unsteadily. "I've wanted to do that since the social," Mason admitted, his forehead resting against hers. Olivia smiled. "Why did you wait so long?" "I wasn't sure if you felt the same way, and I didn't want to take advantage of your position here. If you didn't return my feelings, I didn't want you to feel obligated because I'm your employer." The consideration he showed, even at the cost of his own desires, only confirmed what Olivia already knew: Mason Yates was a man of honor, a man worth loving. "And now," she asked softly, "now I'm asking if you'll allow me to court you properly, Olivia Kendrick. With the intention of making you my wife if you'll have me." Joy bubbled up within her, bright and pure. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to both." August brought the first hints of autumn to the ranch: cooler mornings, golden light that stretched longer across the land, and preparations for the coming winter. It also brought a transformation in the relationship between Mason and Olivia. True to his word, Mason courted her with the same quiet determination he applied to everything in his life. There were small gifts: wildflowers picked during his rides around the property, a book of poetry he'd ordered from San Francisco, a delicate silver hairpin he'd found in Parham's general store. There were evenings spent on the porch talking about their pasts, their hopes, their dreams for the future. And there were stolen moments of tenderness: hands clasped under the table during meals, lingering embraces when they thought themselves unobserved, kisses that grew increasingly passionate as their comfort with each other deepened. The ranch hands watched the developing romance with varying degrees of amusement and approval. Walter, in particular, seemed pleased by the match. "Never seen the boss so happy," he commented to Olivia one morning as she handed him his breakfast. "Caught him whistling yesterday. Whistling. Man hasn't done that in all the years I've known him." Patrick and Samuel were more teasing in their observations, though always respectful. "Miss Kendrick, you've got the boss riding the fence lines with a smile on his face," Samuel remarked. "It's unsettling the cattle." Through it all, Mason maintained a public propriety that Olivia appreciated. Whatever their private feelings, he was careful to preserve her reputation in the eyes of their small community. When they visited Parham together, he was attentive but circumspect. At the August social, he danced with her often but not exclusively, and made sure she was introduced to the respectable women of the town as his intended. Victoria Harrington had departed for San Francisco shortly after her visit to the ranch, a fact that relieved Olivia more than she cared to admit. Her father, however, remained a presence in Parham, and his cool reception of Olivia at the social made it clear he did not approve of Mason's choice. "Mr. Harrington doesn't think I'm good enough for you," Olivia observed as they drove back to the ranch that night. Mason snorted. "Harrington's approval is the last thing I'm concerned about. He's an influential man in the territory," Olivia pointed out. "Victoria said you could have political aspirations. A wife with my background could be a liability." Mason pulled the wagon to a stop, turning to face her fully. "Listen to me, Olivia. I have exactly one ambition: to build a good life with you on our ranch. I don't give a damn about politics or social climbing, and any man who judges you by your family's actions rather than your own character isn't worth knowing." The fierceness of his declaration swept away any lingering doubts. Olivia leaned forward and kissed him. "Consequences be damned." "I love you, Mason Yates," she said when they parted. It was the first time she had spoken the words aloud, though she had felt them for weeks. Mason's eyes softened. "And I love you, Olivia Kendrick, more than I thought it was possible to love another person." They were married on the first Saturday of September, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Pahrump. Walter stood as Mason's best man, while the wife of the local doctor, who had become a friend to Olivia, stood as her matron of honor. The church was filled with neighbors, fellow ranchers, and townspeople who had come to respect both Mason and Olivia. Olivia wore a gown of ivory silk that Madame Beaumont had created especially for the occasion, with tiny pearl buttons down the back and delicate embroidery at the hem and cuffs. Mason, in a new black suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle to meet him. The reception was held at the Crooked Arrow, with tables set up in the yard under a canopy of lanterns. There was music and dancing, abundant food prepared by friends since Olivia couldn't cook for her own wedding, and a general atmosphere of celebration that lasted well into the night. When the last guests had departed or bedded down in the various spare rooms and improvised sleeping spaces around the ranch, Mason led his bride to the main house. Over the past month, he had secretly been renovating the master bedroom, adding a larger bed, new curtains, and a dressing table for Olivia. Fresh wildflowers filled a vase on the nightstand, and candles cast a warm glow over the room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Yates," he said softly as he closed the door behind them. Olivia turned in a slow circle, taking in the changes. "Mason, it's beautiful. When did you find time to do all this?" "I may have neglected some fence repairs," he admitted with a smile, "but I wanted it to be perfect for you, for us." The night that followed was a revelation for both of them, a tender, passionate exploration of each other, guided by love and trust. When Olivia finally fell asleep in Mason's arms, she felt a sense of peace and belonging that she had never known before. Life as Mrs. Mason Yates brought new responsibilities and joys. Olivia continued to cook for the ranch hands, but she also took on the management of the household accounts, started a vegetable garden that thrived under her care, and began keeping chickens for fresh eggs. She rode out with Mason when time permitted, learning the boundaries of their land, understanding the rhythms of ranch life from a new perspective. In late October, as they sat before the fire after a long day of preparing the ranch for winter, Olivia shared news that would change their lives forever. "Mason," she said, her voice trembling slightly with excitement, "I believe we're going to have a baby." The book Mason had been reading fell from his hands. "A baby, you're sure?" Olivia nodded, her hand unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach. "I've missed my monthly courses twice now, and I've been feeling different. Tired in the mornings, certain foods suddenly don't agree with me." For a moment, Mason sat absolutely still, processing the information. Then a smile spread across his face, so full of joy it made Olivia's heart ache with love for him. "A baby," he repeated, moving to kneel before her chair. He placed his large hand over hers on her abdomen. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Olivia asked, though his expression had already answered the question. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it." Mason's voice was rough with emotion. "Olivia, you've given me everything I never dared hope for: your love, your partnership, and now a child, our family. Family." The word resonated within Olivia, healing old wounds she had carried since her abandonment. She had found her true family not in the blood relations who had left her behind, but in this man who had claimed her as his own from their very first meeting, and in the child they had created together. The winter of 1876-1877 was particularly harsh in the Nevada Territory. Snow piled high around the ranch house and bitter winds howled across the land. But inside, warmth and love prevailed. Mason was fiercely protective of Olivia as her pregnancy progressed, insisting she rest often and recruiting the ranch hands to help with the heavier household tasks. Walter, Patrick, and Samuel treated the news of the impending birth with a mixture of excitement and terror, as if the very idea of a baby on the ranch was both miraculous and slightly alarming. They took to bringing Olivia small gifts, a pretty rock found while checking fence lines, a wooden toy Patrick had whittled in the evenings, a soft rabbit skin Samuel had tanned especially for the baby. As Olivia's body changed, Mason's tenderness toward her only deepened. He would spend evenings with his head in her lap, talking softly to her growing belly, telling their unborn child stories of the ranch and promises of the life that awaited it. Boy or girl, this child will know every day that they are loved, he vowed. They will never doubt their place in our family, never wonder if they're wanted. The words were as much for Olivia as for the baby a promise that the cycle of abandonment she had experienced would end with her, that the family they were building together would be founded on unconditional love and acceptance. Spring arrived with new life everywhere, calves in the pastures, wildflowers dotting the landscape, and on a clear morning in early May, the birth of Matthew Walter Yates, named for his father and for the man who had stood by Mason since the beginning of his dream. The labor was long and difficult, with the doctor summoned from Pahrump arriving just in time to assist with the delivery. When it was over, and Olivia held her son for the first time, the months of discomfort and hours of pain faded in the face of the overwhelming love that flooded through her. Mason, who had paced anxiously outside the bedroom door throughout her labor, was finally allowed in. The sight of his strong, capable husband brought to tears by the tiny bundle in her arms was one Olivia knew she would carry in her heart forever. "He's perfect," Mason whispered, gently touching his son's tiny hand. "You're both perfect." The following years brought changes and growth to the Crooked Arrow. With profits from the ranch, Mason was able to purchase adjacent land, expanding their holdings and their herd. Olivia, while devoted to motherhood, also proved to have a keen business mind. It was her suggestion that they diversify by raising horses as well as cattle, and her management that made the venture successful. Matt, as he was known to everyone, grew into a sturdy, curious child with his father's blue eyes and his mother's gentle spirit. He was joined 2 years later by a sister, Emma Rose, whose arrival coincided with the completion of an addition to the ranch house that gave the growing family more space. Through it all, the bond between Mason and Olivia only strengthened. They faced the challenges of ranch life together: drought years, harsh winters, market fluctuations, the occasional rustler or troublemaker. They celebrated their successes as a team and weathered setbacks with united resolve. By the time Nevada achieved statehood in 1864, the Crooked Arrow was known throughout the region as one of the most successful operations in the territory. Mason was respected not just as a rancher but as a community leader, serving on various committees and helping to establish Pahrump's first school. Olivia, far from being a liability to her husband's standing, was admired for her intelligence, compassion, and the gracious home she had created. The same people who had once whispered about Mason marrying his cook now sought her advice on everything from child rearing to household management. Even Victoria Harrington's father eventually came to acknowledge the wisdom of Mason's choice. During a visit to Pahrump some years after the wedding, he encountered Olivia in the general store and actually tipped his hat to her, a small gesture that nonetheless recognized her position as Mrs. Mason Yates, respected wife of one of the area's most successful ranchers. On a warm evening in the summer of 1886, Mason and Olivia sat on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching their children play in the yard. Matt, now 9, was showing 5-year-old Emma how to lasso a fence post, his instructions serious and patient despite his sister's giggles. "They're growing so fast," Olivia remarked, her hand finding Mason's as it so often did in quiet moments. "Too fast," Mason agreed. "Seems like just yesterday Matt was taking his first steps." The decade that had passed since their marriage had left its mark on both of them, lines around Mason's eyes from squinting into the sun, a few strands of silver in Olivia's dark hair. But the changes had only enhanced their bond, each challenge faced together adding another layer to the foundation of their love. "You ever think about them?" Mason asked quietly. "Your family?" The question surprised Olivia. They rarely spoke of her past, not because it was forbidden but because it had gradually lost its power to hurt her. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I wonder if they made it to California, if they're well, if my father ever regretted his choice." She squeezed Mason's hand. "But then I look at all this, our home, our children, our life together, and I realize that what seemed like the worst day of my life was actually the beginning of everything good." Mason brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "The day you came into my life was the day it truly began," he said, the words simple but profound in their sincerity. Olivia leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment filling her as she watched their children playing in the golden light of the setting sun. She had been abandoned once, cast aside by those who should have protected her. But in that moment of deepest despair, she had found her true destiny not just in the man who had claimed her as his own, but in the strength she had discovered within herself. She was Olivia Yates now, wife, mother, partner in all things. The Crooked Arrow was her home, these people her family chosen and cherished, bound by love rather than mere blood. What had begun with abandonment had led to belonging, deeper and more meaningful than anything she could have imagined that dusty day in Pahrump, when Mason Yates had first ridden into her life. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Nevada sky in shades of pink and gold, Mason's arm tightened around her shoulders. "I love you, Olivia Yates," he murmured, the words familiar but never routine, never taken for granted. "And I love you," she replied, the simple truth that had shaped their life together. In the yard, Matt successfully demonstrated a perfect throw of the lasso, capturing the fence post to Emma's delighted applause. Their laughter floated back to the porch, the sweetest music to their parents' ears, the sound of the family they had created together, of dreams realized and promises kept. Once abandoned, Olivia had found where she truly belonged. And as night fell gently over the Crooked Arrow Ranch, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, home, in every sense of the word, forever part of Mason Yates and the legacy they were building together in this wild, beautiful land.